This is one that I've been wondering about for a bit, and I think you're going to be able to understand where I'm going with this question. So if we need to bump some of the parameters around, we can have that discussion too. But I've wondered about this for a long time because when I came up home brewing at that point, I started probably brewing in 2005. The yeast book came out sometime after that. But in that interim, at the time, I came up listening to the Brewing Network podcast out of California, and they had tons of great pro interviews with folks out there, and really from all over the place. At that point, I was listening to a bunch of Jamil Zainasheff stuff. He was one of the authors of that book, but at that time, they had the Mr. Malty yeast calculator, and so I would get my yeast. I would punch in the manufacturing date. I would input the density of my wort, and it would give me the starter size that I need, right? So I had always wondered about things like this because I'd always look through things through that lens. I have a lactose and pitching rate hypothetical. If I'm making a 5% beer and 20% of the density of that beer is composed of lactose or an unfermentable, the density of that beer is far greater than that of a typical 5% beer because that beer is going to only be potentially like maybe 3% ABV if 20% of the fermentables is lactose. How do you calculate pitching rate for that beer? Would it be based simply on the grist and not the non-fermentables that you're adding? Does the additional osmotic pressure from the lactose necessitate higher pitching rates? And if you need to slide that original gravity higher or Plato number higher to make it be more real or whatever, that's cool by me too. But am I making sense with that question?
Yeah, I understand. Yeah, like
what's your thought?
Really, the question is like, should you adjust pitching rate based on fermentability of the wort?
That's a way better question than what I just asked in about 2 paragraphs.
No, but you provided a specific case of lactose, but it also could be like a really high mash, non-alc beer wort too.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of the same scenario. And my answer is scale the pitch rate to the amount of work the yeast needs to do, right? Mm-hmm. If you've got a 15 Plato wort, but it's only going to ferment down to 8 Plato, well, then pitch enough yeast for fermenting 7 Plato wort. It should be scaled to the amount of work it needs to do because that remaining sugar that's not fermentable is irrelevant. The yeast isn't going to use any energy to deal with that. Now, if your starting gravity starts to get really high to the point where osmotic stress is an issue, then you might want to include some additional cells in there just to spread out the work because the osmotic stress is a thing. If you have really high sugar content, that will make the yeast have to do more work to basically maintain that balance between what's inside the cell, inside the factory, and outside. In a standard gravity beer, just scale it to the amount of work the yeast has to do.